Oh.
Welcome to the new episode of Nugget Serbia podcasts. My name is Miroslav Ćuk and I will be flying solo today. My co-hosts Milan, Voja and Mislav are on their deserved vacation. I won't be putting you all to sleep alone though, because I have a special guest today or tonight, depending where you're watching us. His name is Dan Favale. He is the NBA writer for the Bleacher Report, but also a co-host of one of my favorite NBA podcasts, Hard Knocks. Dan is also a deputy editor at one of my favorite NBA stats resources called the NBA Math. You know this resource if you follow me on Twitter, as I retweet the shit out of their TPA graphics every season. You should follow Dan on Twitter at Dan Favale, Dan Favale, or in Serbian, Dan Favale. He is a super fun follow. Just a reminder, if you want to ask Dan anything about any of the NBA teams, you can use the super chat option in the YouTube live chat, and we'll get to it before the end of this episode. Dan, let me ask you the most important question first. How are you?
I'm doing much better after that introduction. Thank you so much for all those kind words. As always, I appreciate your low bar for enjoyable content. So I appreciate you listening to Hardwood Knocks and following me on Twitter. And again, that was a hell of an intro. So thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. We've had the kind of a crazy draft night yesterday. It wasn't super exciting. Only one blockbuster trade, almost no other trades whatsoever. We actually got a couple of trades after the draft night ended. So thank you, NBA, for that. But still, there was a lot of moving pieces, as always, and I wanted to bring you on as one of the most plugged-in national NBA media guys I know, so you can bring us big takeaways about most of Western Conference teams. We'll go more into details about my Denver Nuggets a bit later, but I'd like to start with the other Western Conference serious teams. And I have two reasons not to speak about the Eastern teams. One, I don't want to take 3 hours of your and our viewers' lives. And two, I don't feel my Denver can get out of the Western Conference in the next playoffs. So why bother with the teams we most probably won't be able to meet? So I will reference your Bleacher Report article from 3 days ago a lot in this first segment, because it was an awesome piece of writing, and also to show everybody how huge those 3 days are if you have a draft night between then and now. I'm asking you again, everybody, go follow Dan on Twitter at Dan Favale, so you can get updates on his great work on all of his platforms. So first of all, I hate how everybody says that regular season is not important, because even though they're 100% right, we still have 82 games and we want to speak about them as well. So this is why I'm going to list these teams according to their regular season seeds last season. So first team we're going to start off, of course, are the Utah Jazz. Your prediction 3 days ago was that either Bojan Bogdanovic or Derek Favors will get traded, and lo and behold, Derek Favors is already traded, so congrats on that. And tell me, did Utah go all in for the last 2 seasons, or is there a path for them to be even better this season and maybe not be eliminated by the Clippers without Kawhi?
Yeah, I don't know what their path is to getting better on paper, because this might not actually be the last salary dump that they make. They're like $13.7 million or something below the tax, and if they have to pay $20 to $25 million to keep Mike Conley, that tax bill will shoot up. So if they look at moving Joe Ingles still, maybe even still Bogdanovic, I floated the idea of even Jordan Clarkson, since his value is at an all-time high. I would expect them to be similarly good, especially during the regular season. They're an excellent regular season team when you have Rudy Gobert. And you could envision them being better in the playoffs if Donovan Mitchell's ankle never gets injured. And it was clearly bothering him towards the end of that Clippers series. If you have Mike Conley for that entire series, maybe it's a little bit different because of how important he's proven to be to keep Rudy Gobert involved on the offensive end. So I could see them putting up more of a fight in the playoffs, but this is very much a situation right now where they've sort of used their best assets to tidy up their financial books. We saw it with the, them trading even number 30 on draft night. And then you trade this future pick, which I still don't know the protections on unless it's been released and I haven't seen, but you're trading a future pick that can't convey until 2024 at the earliest because you owe a 2022 pick to Memphis. So you've used a lot of your best assets just to upkeep your books. And so I don't know what the path is to them actually improving. Will they even use their mid-level exception when they could be a tax team? And who can they get? I think they need a bigger wing more than anything, but there are 29 teams that are probably saying the same right now, and they just don't have the money to spend. So I expect Utah, if they're fully healthy, to be a good team, and they'll be good even if Mike Conley leaves, but my guess is you don't make this trade unless you know he's coming back. So they should still be really good. I just don't know how they get to that next level aside from saying, hey, Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell are healthy for the entire playoffs.
Yeah, Mike Conley is basically the best player they can possibly afford in this offseason, right? Is there a path to getting somebody better?
Then Mike Conley, it would have to be via trade. And that's, you do have Bojan Bogdanovic, you have Joe Ingles, you have Jordan Clarkson, you have Royce O'Neal, who's on one of the probably team-friendliest contracts in the NBA at this point. I just don't know what those guys get you, because if teams are sellers, they normally want some type of future asset, and the Jazz really don't have any future assets to tout anymore. And so you don't have the pathway to create actual cap space. And the only thing, your biggest move, I think, will end up being re-signing Mike Conley. And if you don't re-sign him, you still don't even have the money to get someone as good, let alone better than him. So they're in a tough spot. But when you do look at the top of their roster, it's clearly not the worst spot to be in, because they're top right now. Their top 6 or 7 guys are really, really good.
Yeah, and people can be fooled by Donovan Mitchell's youth, because he's the only young guy among those top players. All of them are already on the wrong side of the 30 or something like that.
Yeah, Donovan Mitchell's interesting. I don't know how he has gotten a bad rap in some circles. It seems like people underrate his offense, overrate his defense. It's some interpretations of his game just seems so far detached from reality. But the performance that he's put forth in a lot of these playoff games the past 2 seasons has proven that he can be like that number 1 type dude in those situations, which is really important to have. And if you look at what happened with Utah, aside from the injuries, the real needs for them is just, can you get a bigger wing to go up against the Kawhis, the Paul Georges? You're not going to stop them, but just a body to sort of place in front of them. We saw that with the Clippers this year in Nick Batum, where he tackled a lot of the toughest wing assignments, and no, he wasn't shutting them down, but it was a body that they were able to put on them aside from a Kawhi or a Paul George, and that opens a ton of options. And they also might want to consider trying to put themselves in a position where they can play small at the 5. That's not to say Rudy Gobert is a liability. Your wing rotation is a liability. He can only do so much in certain matchups when the guys in front of him are getting beat left and right. And I think that's where you see him struggle in the playoffs, is that he's just then tasked with, it's not even covering up for too much. It's just an untenable situation for him. And so during the, in the playoffs, 12 to 15 minutes that he's not on the floor, can you get somebody that is either smaller and a little bit more switchable to play the 5? Or even just an outright 5 who's going to have more mobility to him for those situations when you do find yourself in a matchup against a Clippers team that's playing Marcus Morris or Nick Batum at the 5.
Yeah, that's not really great when you have a max player that you need to take out of the game in crunch time because the other team is playing too small. But that's the reality of big 5s. I'm guessing I always come back to the Denver Nuggets. They've worked so hard into making a possible defense around Jokic, because he has problems with lateral quickness and speed in general. So they had to design a lot of special actions on defense to cover up for him. And while they were a complete roster, they actually did it quite well. Well, we don't know how they would do it in playoffs because we didn't see it, but I would say Denver was doing a better job hiding Jokic in some situations than Utah did with Gobert. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And you can't hide Gobert if you're Utah just because he is your defense. And I think that's probably more of the issue for them than anything. Is it's not that Gobert's a liability. It's you've put so little defensive talent in front of him that matchups that would be tough for him in the first place are just that much tougher. And whereas with Denver, they're built to where they can let Jokic, and sometimes he's in a lot of the right spots. He's not really the best helper, but like you can play some aggressive coverages with Jokic. But part of that is also you don't want to bring Rudy Gobert too high out if you're the Jazz, because he is your primary and only rim protector. And in Denver, you can take some chances if you want to have Jokic come out higher and be a little bit more aggressive. He has great hands, and he's also just not your primary, isn't supposed to be your primary rim protector or helper around the basket. And so it's definitely two different situations. And I think it helps that Jokic is one of the best offensive players of all time, whereas Gobert, offense is always going to trounce defense in my book. And I don't think that makes Gobert a liability. It's just you're going to have an easier path to playing him off the floor, playing him into tougher spots than you would Jokic, because Jokic is always going to provide more value in spades at the other end of the floor.
Yeah, and actually, this is the thing about offense being your best defense, because Jokic is so dominant on offense that he forces the other team to play big. Because if you try to play small against Jokic, he will just punish you every time around. So yeah, that was a nice slight on Rudy Gobert. We really enjoyed that on Nuggets Area. Let's move on. Let's move on to Phoenix Suns, our reigning finalists. Your prediction for them for this time that Nick Batum and Reggie Jackson would return. And we still have to wait for that because the free agency starts in 3 days. But what they did this draft night, they actually traded their first-round pick and Javon Carter and got Landry Shamet. How do you feel about this trade? What this trade does to their roster?
For the Suns, it was an interesting trade because I don't think the number 29 pick was going to make a huge difference for them. Although with Jared Butler still on the board at that point, I would have liked to have seen him end up there. But Landry Shamet gives them a real backup too. They haven't had that in really forever. Devin Booker certainly hasn't had that beside him since he's been in Phoenix and been the main guy. And Landry Shamet does give you some extra ball handling. So if Cameron Payne leaves in free agency, if Chris Paul leaves in free agency, and my prediction for the Suns is that Chris Paul will be back. And I think this isn't a victory lap, but it's going to be a lot tougher for him to leave when the Lakers were considered the primary threat and they just traded for Russell Westbrook. So what I think it does to their roster is it puts it on a very expensive course. You have Chris Paul. He's either going to enter free agency this summer, in which case you got to pay him a new deal, or he opts into that $44 million number and you have to extend him off of that. DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges are both extension eligible, and Landry Shamet, who you just traded for, is extension eligible. He's not going to be this super hot guy that teams are after if you let it go to restricted free agency, but he's a career 38.7% shooter, can score in motion. And during his time with the Clippers, before going to the Nets, he did show that there was some ball handling depth to his game. And so I like the move in the short term for Phoenix. Long term, I think it's fair to question a logic here, unless they are prepared to just pay everybody. And my guess is they're not, because team governors always have a breaking point, especially when those team governors are Robert Sarver in Phoenix. The Suns no longer have a G League team for crying out loud. So I'm very interested to see what that means, but I didn't hate the trade overall for them. They were my title pick this past year. And I think at best, if you bring everyone back, you've gotten, I would say, noticeably deeper. And at worst, you've given yourself some insurance against, okay, if Torrey Craig leaves, we don't have the same, Landry Shamet isn't the same defender, but he's at least a body to roll out at the 2 and sometimes the 3. If Cameron Payne leaves, and he might, just because he could get paid in free agency, you have someone, who doesn't have the same playmaking acumen as Cameron Payne, but it's also someone who's going to just help you with your scoring punch there. So I thought it was a solid trade, but there's an element of TBD here to see what Phoenix does with this roster and how much of it keeps together, not just next season, but beyond.
Yeah, Phoenix was actually in a perfect situation because they had a bunch of these really small contracts and had really good players on those small contracts. And this is something you actually need if you want to go a long way through the playoffs. You just have to have some underpaid guys in order to be possible to have a quality rotation. I messed up my notes just before when I said Batum and Reggie Jackson would return. That was the Clippers note. Your note for the Phoenix was that Chris Paul would resign. Yeah, what would be the other avenues for Chris Paul if he wouldn't resign in Phoenix? What would you say?
I honestly don't know at this point. I think it would involve, you can go to Miami. They can get the 25 million-ish in cap space. The Knicks have all the cap space in the world. I think you have to ask yourself the question of, will I be better suited to win a championship in either of these spots? Maybe you can make him a case for Miami, but at this point, going through the Nets in the East is more harrowing than going through anyone in the West next year, especially when you look at the Kawhi injury in Los Angeles. Will he play for the Clippers next year? And then Jamal Murray's torn left ACL with Denver. I think a lot of people expect him to come back sooner than the normal trajectory for these injuries, but that still puts him at most probably playing half the season. And what does he look like when he comes back? So the West is probably at the top, just a little bit less harrowing than the East right now when you look at the Brooklyn and Milwaukee and maybe even Philly, depending on what they do. So why would you want to go to a Knicks team that's still pretty far away from contention? They had a nice season, but like Chris Paul, Julius Randle, and RJ Barrett, where is that getting you? I don't know. Maybe you win a playoff series. I'd be shocked if that was the team to come out of the East. Miami might have a better chance at that, but then you're getting in a situation where you're probably taking a substantial pay cut to do so. He has that $44 million player option. I would say at most they could give him between 23 and 25 to start. Is a 3-year, $75 million deal, let's say, enough for him to leave the $44 million player option on the table in Phoenix? I'd be a little bit surprised. He could opt in and try and force his trade to Miami like he did in Los Angeles, going to Houston, opted in with the Clippers and traded the Rockets. But you have to be sure you're going to an upgraded situation. My best guess would be that he either extends off his player option or he signs a brand 3-year deal with Phoenix. And if it doesn't work out after next season, that's maybe when both parties look at, okay, can we find him a different trade? Because I really just don't see the better situation or even the team at this point that's going to come in and pry him away from Phoenix.
Yeah, do we know when does his player option ends? When he has to decide? Is it 3 days from now or?
Yeah, I'm actually fuzzy on the details. I thought it would have been July 31st based off the free agency timeline, but I'm so used to operating off the July 1st free agency timeline, and June 30th is normally the opt-out date. So I was just going off that. I would expect we know the decision, though. We're recording this on July 30th. We'll know it before August would be my guess.
Yeah. Okay. So soon to have some hot news. Let's go now to LA Clippers. Another team that has a similar problem like Denver Nuggets coming into next season because their best player, Kawhi Leonard, is injured and we have no idea when he is returning, if he is returning before the end of the season at all. Your prediction was that either both Batum and Reggie Jackson would return. They got Jason Preston at pick 33 with magic pick they traded for. And what are the moves they can still make to be super competitive regardless of not having Kawhi? Or do they have to take a year off preparing for the next one?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Some people have proposed that they should just embrace a gap year. You really can't, because you owe your first round pick to Oklahoma City in 2022 and it's unprotected. So they just own your pick. And that's also given them some issues. When you look at the trade market, a lot of people identified, hey, maybe you trade for Kemba Walker. He'll help your offense. And you needed someone like him when he's healthy anyway, even with Kawhi. If you're the Thunder, though, why are you trading Kemba to the Clippers to help them when you own their pick next season? And so it's in a wonky situation. I think you have to go for it. They did on draft night. They made a swing. They traded a Detroit second to move up 4 spots and draft Keon Johnson. And I really like him, but he's a project. He talked about how he's tried to mold his game after Kawhi Leonard. He can be very explosive around the rim when he's finishing. He's shown he has like a nifty in-between game and can pull up for jumpers. He's billed as one of the best on-ball defenders coming out of the draft. If he has a 3-point shot, this is someone with all-star potential. I'm wondering if that pick doesn't get made if Kawhi Leonard is healthy, because now you're probably envisioning yourself to have some flexibility. Yeah, we'll give Keon Johnson some burn where we wouldn't have with Kawhi, where maybe they would have drafted someone who was considered more rotation ready. And that does hint at them understanding the reality of their situation without Kawhi if he doesn't play at all next year. At the same time, when you look at the roster, if you bring back Reggie Jackson, which I think you can and also have to, and if you bring back Nick Batum, less sure on that, but I also think you have to because of what he did for you defensively. I mean, Nick Batum led the Clippers in total minutes played this year. That is like one of the most mind-melting stats of the season for me that you just couldn't have predicted. I still think you're good, and they did beat the Jazz. Came back from 2-0 down without Kawhi Leonard. So they'll still be good. I just don't. Are they still top 4 in the West, top 5? Are they even one of the surefire playoff teams? I don't know. I don't see the path to them being an actual contender next year. I think the most they could hope to do is, do they compile some of their bigger contracts when you're looking at Patrick Beverley, Luke Kennard, if Serge Ibaka opts in, I believe we're still waiting on that player option news as well, and turn an expensive point guard. But one of those expensive point guards is already gone in Russell Westbrook because he's with the Lakers. Or you could maybe get Kawhi back next year right before the playoffs, and he comes back and is just a monster, and you're able to be like sort of the Lakers of this season, but better, where if you're a 7 seed, the 2 seed doesn't want to face you just because you're absolutely terrifying on paper. But overall, I just don't, I think their ceiling next year is probably a team that can win a playoff series, and I'd be shocked if it's anything much higher than that.
I have to say, it was a very satisfying first round of playoffs in the West this season, because everybody predicted that number 1 and number 2 seed will have a lot of problems with number 7 and number 8, and they totally didn't. It was quite an easy series for both Utah and for Phoenix, and that made me feel good, because I felt like it was I felt it was a narrative-driven thing that Lakers and Clippers weren't really that good. Lakers and who was the 8?
Well, it was supposed to be the Warriors, but it was the Grizzlies.
Yeah, it was supposed to be the Warriors, but it was the Grizzlies. Yeah. So nobody cared about the Grizzlies, but it was supposed to be the Warriors. And in reality, these teams, Utah and Phoenix, were really, really good last season, and of course, they deserved what they got in these playoffs. Okay, let's now go to Dallas Mavericks, who are a very interesting team for me. Luka will probably return from Tokyo with a medal. And I remember when Nikola Jokic returned with a silver in 2016, he made a significant leap in the following season. What would Luka taking a leap mean, and what are the Mavericks' chances if that happens? Do you expect Porzingis on their roster by the end of this season?
By the end of the season, that's an interesting question. I would guess yes, just because I don't know who's tripping over themselves to acquire, the 3 years and $100+ million left on his deal. Maybe he could play fantastic for the first half of the year, and teams will be interested at the deadline. But if he's playing fantastic and you're the Mavericks, you don't want to trade for him. They're more just looking at the rest of their roster is just as puzzling. They could have cap space this summer, but not if they want to bring back Tim Hardaway Jr., who was probably their second best player for some pretty long stretches last year. Will they make some salary dumps to have cap space and re-sign Tim Hardaway Jr.? That seems like their quickest path. They need a legitimate co-star for Luka, preferably one who is also a shot creator. And, he effectively needs his Jamal Murray, where it's like you don't need Jamal Murray to be a fellow top 10 player because you have Jokic, who's this superhuman megastar. You have a megastar in Luka Doncic. You need someone of Jamal Murray's caliber. Maybe he could be a little bit worse than Jamal Murray, but you need someone who at least comes close to that type of a level. I don't even know how they get him if they work with cap space this summer. Kyle Lowry would be very interesting there, as would Mike Conley. I just don't know if they leave their current teams. I wouldn't expect Conley to leave Utah, as we already talked about, after they dumped Derek Favors, and I would still expect Phoenix to bring back Chris Paul. And after them, it's like, all right, well, Kawhi's not going anywhere. And even if he does, he's going to miss either all of next year or most of it. You start getting into names like Norman Powell, who's good, but he's not going to turn your fortunes on a head like that. And so this team, unless they can figure out a way to make a trade, which is exceedingly difficult for them, given that they owe a 2023 pick to the Knicks, they might be in a better position than they were this season, just because Porzingis should be healthier. Doncic is just another year seasoned. And some of the spots in the West are weaker. We've already talked about the Clippers and the Nuggets dealing with injuries to their stars. So maybe they could be in a little bit better of a spot, but I I feel like they're one very significant player short, is probably the best way to put it, of being an actual title contender.
Yeah, you said that Tim Hardaway Jr. will probably return, and he might be the closest player to that second star for Dallas, even though, of course, his level of play is not high enough.
Yeah, I think you need to bring him back just because what is the alternative? Who are you replacing Tim Hardaway Jr. with? I think what they should probably look at doing, unless there are ways for them to have enough room to sign a Kyle Lowry and re-sign Tim Hardaway Jr., but that assumes that you're going to get a Kyle Lowry, which, he's probably going to have interest from Miami, New York. Definitely Toronto would want to bring him back, I'd assume. So can you pivot to like a Spencer Dinwiddie? That might be someone who's interesting, and I don't know if he's a good enough second, ball handler to launch you into title contention, but he's certainly better than anything you've had. Even Will Barton at this point, if they were able to sign him, should he leave the Nuggets, he would probably easily be the second best ball handler or just offensive player on the wings that Luka has played with there. So I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is just mission critical to them because I don't know what other avenues they have, despite the ability to create cap space to improve their team.
I would really love to see if it would be possible for Chris Paul to come to Dallas, because he is a big enough star to demand the ball from Luka and say, okay, you play off ball this possession because I'm Chris fucking Paul. Because it feels to me like Luka is having a similar problem like James Harden had before Chris Paul came to Houston, because nobody was brave enough to take the ball away from him. So that made their attack, their offense stagnant, and that cost them in the offense. In the playoffs, it was easy to plan defense against them in playoffs, and it was a bit better with Chris Paul over there. And of course, he got hurt, and the story ended like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I would be, if Phoenix is willing to trade him, Dallas could certainly get to the salary matching tools that they would need to get Chris Paul if he opts in and wants an extension off that or whatever. And yeah, they could probably just sign him in free agency. I wonder if that's too similar to like the, as you sort of talked about the James Harden, Chris Paul dynamic, which was very fruitful, but it seemed like they butted heads on ball control, where you're playing with someone in Devin Booker now, if you're Chris Paul, who's, I guess Luka's younger, so that's something if he's looking up to Chris Paul and has the respect like Devin Booker does. But Devin Booker is also doing more off the ball than Luka has ever done, in large part because Luka's never been able to play off the ball really in Dallas. So yeah, I'd definitely be intrigued by it. But then you get to a situation where if your mega addition is a 36-year-old point guard, how short is your window from there? I mean, Kyle Lowry is not much younger. He's 35. Mike Conley's 33. I believe. So you're going to have those problems anyway. But I think Chris Paul winds up being the most expensive of those three. And so there's less of a chance that you could keep him and then do other stuff to your roster. But I would definitely like to see the pairing for sure, because if there's anyone, when you look at a Kyle Lowry or Mike Conley, yeah, they allow Luka to play off the ball, but Chris Paul almost forces Luka to play off the ball. And I do think sometimes that's what he could need a little bit, is we've seen him look like he's run aground by the end of the year. As he gets later into the playoffs. And then also just expand a part of your game. I think Atlanta was at their best this year when there were games where you saw Trae Young kind of being off the ball and actually moving off the ball. He didn't do it a ton, but just having that access to that type of offense, I think did a great deal for them. And Luka just has never had the opportunity to do that. And who knows if he wants to do that. He should definitely want to do that, but he certainly never had the opportunity so far.
Yeah, definitely not since he came to the NBA. It was a bit different story while he was playing in Real Madrid, but that was a long time ago already.
That's a great point. Okay. Yeah, that's a really
but he was super young back then. He was like 17, 18. So yeah, that makes it a bit different.
Super young now. What is he, 22? My God, he's 22. Still so young.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's insane, the level of play he has at 22. Okay, now let's go to the most interesting team for me, and that's Portland Trail Blazers. They are obviously a team with a very wide range of outcomes for their season, because we have no idea what will happen. We can only try to guess. Do you expect them to fall out of the playoff picture this season, even if they extend Normal Powell for 15+ million per season?
I don't, it's when you say it like that, if you're going to spend 15 plus million on Norman Powell, you better not fall out of the playoff picture. But then you look at the West and it's like, it could happen. I mean, there are some foregone playoff teams. I think Denver's one, even without Murray. The Lakers are there. I guess I would put the Warriors there at this point. Dallas is there. That's 4 locks. And, I think you could probably still put the Clippers there, which would be 5. Utah is 6. Phoenix is 7. It's like the numbers get up there pretty quickly. You could probably say there are 5 or 6 locks, and that could make it difficult for Portland because I don't know that I would call them a lock. If everyone's healthy, sure. But Yusuf Nurkic doesn't seem happy. They're going to have the specter of Damian Lillard's potential trade request either at midseason or more likely at the end of next year, just looming over their entire 2021-2022 season. Will the Ben Simmons rumors ever dissipate? Because it doesn't, as long as he's on Philly, I think the CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons framework is going to be talked about. What type of toll does that take on your team? And how do you get better on defense? I do think their roster is better than, I think they were bottom 3 in points allowed per possession last year. And we saw it with Nurkic on the floor, especially when he was playing minutes with Covington. But you need additional talent there. And especially when you're going to lead on these 3 guard lineups where there's McCollum, Powell, and Lillard, you can't depend on Powell to really defend like a wing all the time. He's only 6'4", and sometimes he plays up, but he really is only 6'4". And just how do you flesh out your depth from there? Because their top 5 guys, assuming they keep Powell, are going to be really good. Does Simons pop this season? What does the back big situation look like? I don't think Enes Kanter is going to be back. And he gives you limitations defensively, of course. Yeah, Melo, what happens with him? It seems, he's still divisive. I thought he was by and large good for what the Blazers needed him to be. Still a little bit of a ball stopper, but that's also how they play. They weren't a team that needed to move the ball a ton. And someone who came in and hit a bunch of threes for them, I think he played his role for the most part fine. But bringing him back, what does that really do for you? And they feel like, just as I sort of said for Dallas, they feel a significant piece short of being in the real title contender discussion. And I think that finding that piece is really tough for them because they don't have cap space. And then your trade assets are weird because CJ McCollum is so good that how much of an upgrade you're getting if you're moving him. And in most trades, you're going to have to give stuff in addition to CJ McCollum if you want to upgrade because he's not an all-star. So it puts them in this very weird spot. I like Ben Simmons for them. I like CJ McCollum a little bit less for the Philly in that end of the spectrum. So if you can do that deal, I really do think that elevates the ceiling of your team. But if not, is there like a medium-sized move you could make? Larry Nance Jr. feels like he'd make a really big difference for this team. If they were able to get a hold of Maxi Kleber out of Dallas, who I know the Mavericks love, so maybe they can't. But that type of move, I think, would improve their team a great deal. I also just don't know if they have the assets to get it done.
I would really love to see Ben Simmons in Portland for CJ McCollum. And if you were Daryl Morey, would you accept CJ McCollum and 4 first-round picks and 3 pick swaps for Ben Simmons?
Yeah, I mean, if they were going to offer that much, I absolutely would. I just don't think Portland wants to give anything in addition to CJ McCollum after the postseason that Ben Simmons had. I think the framework that's been floated a bunch has been CJ, Robert Covington, and a pick. And I think that there's been a lot of pushback from Portland people. If you talk to their fans, that they don't want to give up that much for Ben Simmons, which I think is, I don't want to say it's ridiculous because the offensive concerns are real, but he would be an absolute game changer for them on defense. So if I'm Portland, I don't know if I'm giving that many picks and swaps. If I'm Portland and there's a way to get Ben Simmons, though, I'm probably going to make that a primary focus because I think this is your last, I would argue, even though he has 4 years left on his deal and then 3 after this one, this is your last chance with Damian Lillard. He's already pissed off. We've heard it. We've seen it. He's done everything except actually request the trade. He's hinted at it, danced around it, basically given them an ultimatum. So this is your last chance with him. And I do think you need to make that all in play. They're probably a little bit leerier of mortgaging their future if they think that Dame might leave. So that's where giving up all those picks for Ben Simmons comes into play. But if it's not going to be him, then it needs to be someone else. And maybe it doesn't need to be a star. Can you get someone, like I said, Larry Nance, where you're not giving up CJ McCollum and yet you're still significantly boosting your team? That would be an interesting route for them to explore. But I don't, I see a path to them becoming a bona fide, or let's say a playoff lock, aside from making the Simmons trade and that working out really well from them, assuming it's even available to them. I don't know what this team's path to the next level of the Western Conference contender circle is.
And this pushback from Portland fans is really crazy because if you think about Ben Simmons, he's the most versatile defender in the whole league. He can play, he can guard 1 to 5, no problems. And at this point of his career, on offense, he's actually a big. He's no longer a wing. So if you look at him as a power forward on the offense, he would be the best big Dame Lillard ever played with. You know, you just don't expect him to shoot threes. Just expect him to cut and to catch the lobs, and it would be a perfect kind of offense as well. But I'm not sure why Portland isn't ready to give everything for Ben Simmons, because if they don't, I just feel Dame will just leave, and that will be it.
I think they're probably just terrified of Ben Simmons' offense. He's not the cleanest fit with the use of Nurkic, and then look what he did in the semifinals against Atlanta, which is to say he did nothing basically on offense. Yeah. So we've seen he can be somewhat valuable in the regular season, and if you put the ball in his hands, like, he's a really good passer. He'll help you in transition. Maybe in Portland, they've never really unlocked this in Philly, but using Ben Simmons as a screener, can you turn him into a little bit of a rim runner in situations, because he's not a bad finisher. And we saw him mash some guys with these hook shots in the middle of the regular season. There was a stretch where he was shooting like 60-something% on hook shots this past season. So there are more layers to his game, I think. And I if you get Ben Simmons, I think it probably opens up the opportunity to more easily move away from Yusuf Nurkic, maybe for a big who can shoot threes, but also protect the rim, even though those are super hard to find. You could also go super small with Ben Simmons as your primary big in certain stretches. We saw Yusuf Nurkic kind of hint at shooting threes too, so maybe he is a fine fit next to Ben Simmons. But I think just his offensive performance, given how valuable CJ McCollum has mostly been to the Blazers in the playoffs when it comes to generating offense, that's probably where Portland's coming from. And you also don't want to mortgage too much of your future if you think Dame might ask her out. But I think you can certainly make the case that CJ has probably never been more expendable because of having Norman Powell there.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's now move to the team I love to hate, the LA Lakers. You've predicted they will trade for the third option, and they actually did. So congrats, they got the only blockbuster trade on the draft night. They got Russell Westbrook for Kyle Kuzma, KCP, Montrezl Harrell, and a first-round pick that wasn't really high. It was in the 20s. So a very interesting deal for the Lakers, because I don't know, maybe Washington couldn't get anything better than that for Russell Westbrook at this moment. So Lakers just took that opportunity and got the starting five with the worst spacing in the last 10 years of NBA. So congrats for that. But tell me, Lakers made only one really disgusting signing last season when they got Marc Gasol for a minimum deal, which was absolute bullshit. No other team would get him for a minimum deal. Do you expect them to get some other guys this offseason that would not play for a minimum deal anywhere else? And can the league do anything against blatant trophy hunting?
I don't think we can do anything against blatant trophy hunting, just because that's, if the players want to make less money, that's going to be their prerogative. It is funny. I do agree that I don't know that Marc Gasol would have taken that money to play anywhere else. Perhaps the Clippers if they didn't have Ibaka, and then the Lakers just proceeded to not use Gasol enough. So you took less money to wind up in a situation that maybe wasn't ideal. I do expect them to get some trophy hunting type guys. I just don't know who those players are going to be. They better hope they're wings who can shoot, because that is what they need. They were in the bottom 10 of both three-point attempt rate and accuracy this past year. Three-point shooting alone isn't everything, but they just acquired one of the least efficient jump shooters in general in the league in Russell Westbrook. I believe out of the 61 players who attempted at least 5 pull-up jumpers per game last season, he had the 5th lowest effective field goal percentage on them. And you're putting him in a lineup where you have Anthony Davis, who, aside from going molten in the bubble a year ago, is not really a shooter. And you have Russell Westbrook. So those are 2 non-shooters at all times. If you play a traditional big next to Davis, like you have been, where you don't want him to be the 5, now you're adding another non-shooter to the equation, I guess, unless it's Marc Gasol. You also traded away 2 of the guys who led you in three-point makes last year in KCP and Kuzma. They ranked 1 and 2 in three-point makes for the Lakers. there are going to be most of your lineups now are going to have 3 non-shooters on the floor, if not 4. That's problematic. I do think what bodes well for them is we kind of saw it with Milwaukee that you can win ugly. Giannis isn't really a shooter. Drew Holiday went cold from beyond the arc, and Milwaukee shot, I think, sub 33% or whatever for the playoffs in general and still won the title. This is still like an extreme on the Lakers' behalf. And so you need to hope that you can reload just the shooting deck. Will Wayne Ellington sign with you? Is JJ Redick healthy? He'd be a great fit for this team. And can you get anybody like on the higher end? Is a Reggie Bullock out of reach? I would argue yes. Is a, I don't even know. Like they just in a vacuum, they can't really afford anybody, but you know that they're going to get somebody. Like, will Patty Mills come? And because we know we can get more money, but he wants to contend for a title. So that would be someone that would help them a bunch. Trevor Ariza, I don't even know how much he actually helps them. Otto Porter, if he's looking to reboot his stock and starts hitting threes again. I would expect them to get a few someones. I also wouldn't rule out a Buddy Hield trade just yet either. There are ways that they can expand the deal with Westbrook to get Buddy Hield. It would involve either signing and trading Schroeder somewhere or signing and trading both Alex Caruso and Talen Horton-Tucker to maybe the Kings or the Wizards, how the mechanisms work. They will end up getting better value on the free agency market than most other teams. And I do think it's fair to note that they've at least improved their no LeBron minutes, which have been a disaster for the past few seasons since he's been there, basically. Westbrook does help you during those stretches, but during stretches next to LeBron and Anthony Davis, there are chances that it could be rough. And so I think what they've done is they've elevated their floor. I'm not sure that they've actually raised their ceiling.
I would like to speak for a minute about their defense as well. Do you think their defense with Russell Westbrook will be better or worse, without KCP and Kuzma? Because Harrell was terrible on defense anyway, so I'm not counting him.
Yeah, I think they might still be just as good just because by virtue of Anthony Davis, he just does so many things that don't show up, whether you're looking at the box score, on off splits, that make him so valuable. But Kyle Kuzma quietly turned into a solid positional defender. KCP gave you someone who would defend the point of attack. That's not Russell Westbrook's MO. He can do it on certain nights, but he's going to turn 33 in the fall. His athleticism translates to the offensive end way more than it does the defensive end. So I would argue it gets worse. What helps you, though, is that, like I said, you still have Anthony Davis. If you bring back Talen Horton-Tucker, Alex Caruso was borderline all defense last year. So you probably had enough defensive talent to spare. But if you get into lineups where, we have to see how are they going to flesh out the Anthony Davis, LeBron, Russell Westbrook trio, who is playing those minutes. If it's Alex Caruso, you've now inserted someone who's not the worst shooter, but not a high volume shooter. But if you do lean into shooting, if Wesley Matthews decides to come back, I guess he gives you some defense, but he wasn't fantastic this year. And he also didn't shoot it too well this year either. So you need to be very careful about how you are fleshing out the lineups with those three, because there's a chance that your defense could take a turn there. I'd argue that with the way LeBron has defended with Anthony Davis, you'll be fine. But they did sacrifice some in the trade itself in a vacuum. They did sacrifice some defensive talent here.
Yeah. Very interesting season in front of LA Lakers. And because I'm hating them so much, I'm really enjoying these late LeBron seasons, and hopefully it will not turn out to be a good one again. Okay, now, very interesting team, Golden State Warriors. For the second time in a row, we were expecting them to make a blockbuster trade on the draft night. Last year, they couldn't pull it off, so they got Wiseman. This time, they were probably dangling Wiseman together with 7th and 14th pick, and they got nothing they were happy about in return. So at the end, they've drafted Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody. So what do you think about their chances in the regular season? And is there still time for them to get that, I don't know how to say it, 3rd star, 4th star for their team to be better?
Right. I like, so the picks themselves, Moses Moody feels like he'll be a very plug and play 3-and-D wing for them. Jonathan Kuminga is going to be a project, and it feels like you make that pick if you're going for upside, someone with star upside who, if his offensive skill set sort of is fleshed out, he could be a really good basketball player. I think you also make that pick in that spot because you want to maintain the trade value of that selection. And so I don't think it's too late for them to do something this offseason. we don't normally see these like star blockbuster deals on draft night. They typically happen later in the offseason. And to use Bradley Beal as an example, he apparently said he wants to stay in Washington, but like they're clearly veering away from a win now approach, which I commend them for because they weren't good enough with Russell Westbrook to win a title. But you actually want to be part of a process if you're Bradley Beal that'll take a few years. So maybe his name ambles onto the block. If Kyle Lowry leaves in Toronto, do the Raptors look at moving Van Fleet and or Siakam and just rebuild around the fourth pick in Scotty Barnes? That's probably a less likely outcome just because had they drafted Jalen Suggs, I would say, okay, that's the route they're going to go. But Scotty Barnes doesn't, he's a really good playmaker, but I don't know if he forecasts as the focal point of an offense. But still, maybe Siakam or Van Fleet comes on the trade market should Lowry leave and Toronto wants to take a more gradual approach. Maybe Levine doesn't want to renegotiate and extend with Chicago and they have to look at shopping him. Maybe there's just a name that we haven't thought of. There's always the next star on the market. And a lot of the times it's one that we haven't even considered. So I think while picks normally lose some of their value once you drive them off a lot and they turn into an actual player, I still think the Warriors are well positioned to get in any blockbuster negotiations should they actually commence over the offseason. It will depend on who's available, but I do expect another star to be traded this offseason. Will they be involved? Because if you're Steph, Clay, and Dre, you're looking at Moody, nice piece. Jonathan Kuminga, okay, great. 3 years from now, maybe he's an all-star. You don't care about 3 years from now if you're Steph, Clay, and Dre. You want to win now. And there's an obligation for the Warriors to explore ways to do that. So to wrap up a very long point where I'm running in circles, I don't think it's too late for them, but it still sort of is reliant on the trade market itself. Because if Bradley Beal was readily available, I'm sure that we would have heard them being heavily linked to him all throughout draft night.
Oh, yeah. Interesting position. We still have to see how Clay Thompson looks like before we can really have any strong feelings about their chances for this season. Let's now go quickly through several other teams. Pelicans. First the Memphis Grizzlies. They got Zaire Williams from the pick they got from Pelicans, and then they got Santi Aldama from a Jazz pick. They also did another trade with picks, but before that they took contracts of Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe. Will Eric Bledsoe be on this team this season at all? What's your feeling?
My guess would be no. Maybe he gives back a ton in a buyout. I would argue he does have to give back a ton because if you're the Grizzlies, you'd probably rather just keep him on the books and potentially use his salary as an anchor in other trades. Whereas if you buy him out, it's just a dead number that you can't do anything with during the season. So I don't think he'll start the season there. I certainly don't think he'll finish the season there if he does start the season there. They clearly made themselves worse in the immediate term, but I sort of like the idea of what they're trying to do. They're making swings, and now is the time to do that when John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. are still on their rookie deals and you haven't paid them yet. It just gets harder to take these bigger swings or moves when you commit a max to a player. It's also, I don't know how necessarily valid this is, but there is the thought that once you do invest a max contract in someone, you're sort of on the clock to contend. Not unlike the Suns with a Devin Booker, and they ended up moving into or trading for Chris Paul. So I like the idea in Memphis to take these bigger swings. I am shocked that I'm curious to know if Zaire Williams was the guy that they were targeting at 10 all along. That felt like a situation where they tried to get up to a spot where James Bouknight would have fallen, and then he went, would he go 8th or 6th, 9th, wherever he went, and he wasn't on the board for them, and they had to pivot. So that's going to be something that's interesting to watch. But if you were that invested in Zaire Williams before the draft, kudos to you for moving up to get him. My guess would be that he probably still would have been available when they were on the board at 17 initially, but I like sort of the idea of what they're doing. They very easily could have tried to just really double down on another season where they made the playoffs unexpectedly, but that threatens to sort of tether you to mediocrity. And so it does seem like they're striving for something bigger, even if you can't necessarily see the outline of what's going to happen long-term. How are they getting that third star? Is it Zaire Williams? Is it someone else? They have all these future picks now. They might be able to get involved in a star trade if they know that star is willing to stick with them long term. So again, I think I appreciate the mindset that is being maintained by Memphis.
Yes, and on the other side of that big trade, there was Pelicans, and they got Trey Murphy from this Grizzlies pick. They gave away those better picks to offload bad contracts. Do they feel they're on the hot seat regarding keeping Zion happy at this point of time?
It sure seems like it. I would argue, and this is the Callis perspective, that it doesn't matter just because he's going to sign a second deal to stay in New Orleans. It's just you don't see players not get that second contract when they're of his caliber. They're going to want at least the 4-year deal, but maybe 4 plus a player option the 5th year of just that what will probably be a super max for him. At the same time, you have given a max to Brandon Ingram. Lonzo Ball is a restricted free agent this summer. So if you end up paying him, like you're really on the clock because you're getting expensive one way or another. You did lop off salary this summer. You're in a position to just renounce everyone and get Kyle Lowry. I think he's a great fit for this team. If it costs you everything it did to dump that salary, plus having to get rid of Josh Hart and Lonzo Ball to get him, that's a steep opportunity cost. For someone who's, Kyle Lowry's a 2-year guy right now. I mean, maybe you get 3 really good years out of him, but I don't think you sign him with the expectation that you're doing more than getting an all-star type player for the next 2 years. And so they're in an interesting spot. I definitely think they feel an obligation to accelerate the process because 1, Zion is so good, and 2, they've already started getting somewhat expensive. But I don't know what they're going to turn that cap space into. And if this was just if they don't turn it into anything where they just re-sign Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart and all they were doing was really saving money to make sure that they're not avoiding the luxury tax, I think that trade for dumping off Adams and Bledsoe will look a little bit different. They might also split the difference where it's maybe they're able to bring back Lonzo Ball and sign someone using the rest of their cap space, or maybe they keep Josh Hart and sign someone else while letting Lonzo Ball walk. They have a bunch of scenarios on the table. I am very interested, however, to see what they do because they're far enough away from title contention at this point that for them to act like a buyer it's a risk. It's a real risk.
Yes. And San Antonio Spurs is also the interesting team at this point. They got Josh Primo at number 12, which is quite a surprise to most analysts. Should the Spurs finally blow things up, things don't seem to go their way at all, and they might even fall out of the mediocrity purgatory at this point.
Yeah, I would argue it's time to rebuild. You're sort of at this organic crossroads where DeMar DeRozan, Patty Mills, and Rudy Gay are a free agent. You have these young players or youngish players who are good, but none of them profile is great. Where you look at Derek White, DeJounte Murray, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell. Who's your primary cornerstone in that instance? Maybe it's a Murray or a White gets there. I don't know that they would. It's definitely not a Jakob Poeltl or a Lonnie Walker. Vassell is more complimentary, even though he should be super valuable. So it's time. The rebuild feels overdue. Maybe they view Josh Primo as that guy because, like you said, no one expected them to take him at number 12. Everyone was floored. I don't even know anything about Josh Primo really because I was not expecting him to go there. So, but it is the Spurs. Greg Popovich is in his 70s. If he's still there, they might feel an obligation to continue trying to tread water. They can split the difference. They have a ton of cap space this year. I'm also wondering if it's more likely DeMar DeRozan returns now because another team, the Lakers, that were considered a sign and trade candidate for him, they're not going to want him now that Russell Westbrook's there. So who's the team that's going to pay DeMar DeRozan? I think you could argue that the Spurs are most likely. Maybe the Knicks do something where they sign both DeRozan and Kyle Lowry and just reunite them. I honestly have no idea. But if I were the Spurs, yes, I would be rebuilding because it's time for you to sort of take that bigger swing and angle yourself either through really leaning on your player development, on your incumbents to see who might be your primary cornerstone, or just be bad enough next season to be in a position to draft that cornerstone. I think the counterpoint to that is if you took DeMar DeRozan and Patty Mills and Rudy Gay off the Spurs, they're very clearly still not the worst team in the league just because DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Jakob Poeltl, those are good basketball players. So you have to get in a position where you have to sell some of those players. That gets awkward. They've also been mentioned as a potential Ben Simmons destination. Maybe that might be their best way to straddle the two lines, whereas Ben Simmons is still 25, but he helps you win now. And so failing a move like that, they are in a tough spot, but I really think it's time to hit the reset button there. It should have happened with the Kawhi trade. They delayed the inevitable by taking the DeRozan package, but it's time to finally just admit it and start rebuilding.
I 100% agree with you that they are not the worst team in the West, because now we are entering the twilight zone of the West. First team to see is are the Kings. The Kings drafted Damian Mitchell. Do you have any thoughts on them for the next season? Is there any hope for them beating anybody outside of Nuggets next season? Because they are Nuggets killers for some reason.
I like a lot of Sacramento's players. De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Halliburton, Harrison Barnes is really good. Rashawn Holmes, one of the most underrated players in the league. I don't know what they're doing there, though, and that's a real issue. They might not be able to keep Rashawn Holmes because they only own his early bird rights, but even if you bring him back, I'm just very curious about the Davion Mitchell pick. He should be a really good defender, but he's 6'1", and is probably better off playing alongside a bigger guard and a wing. You don't have that bigger guard or wing. It's not Fox. It's not really Halliburton. And you also have Buddy Hield there. It's like, where are all these backcourt swingman minutes coming from? I would guess that maybe this augurs a trade. I would be not mildly surprised, but I would expect Buddy Hield maybe to be traded at this point. I think what they need to do is take a step back and reset themselves. If they want to be good, I think then you have to look at, okay, well, it's time. We need to get in the superstar sweepstakes where everyone but De'Aaron Fox is on the table and we're trying to trade for a star. I don't know if they're going to go that route. I would argue it's better to keep Halliburton, keep Mitchell, keep Fox, and just rebuild around them and see what you can get for Hield, see what you can get for Harrison Barnes. It would be a blow if you lost Rashawn Holmes for nothing, but give yourself, start Marvin Bagley at center then and see what's left in with him, even if it doesn't seem like he wants to be there either. So I think they should probably strip it down more than anything. But if they want to end their playoff drought, it's stop being half pregnant would be my advice to them. It's just go all in on the star trade. We saw it with the Suns. They clearly showed more bright harbingers than Sacramento has to this point. But if you want to be a good team, go out and get really good players and make those gambles that we've seen other non-glamour markets make in recent years with Toronto and Kawhi. He leaves, but they win a title. Paul George, he leaves, but he also stayed because he re-signed there, and you got a crap ton to trade him. And then Phoenix with Chris Paul. So they have to pick a direction, and I don't think they've done that yet. And the Davion Mitchell pick, not that it needed to infer what they were doing, I think it only made it difficult to figure out what they were doing.
What are the chances for Minnesota, Houston, or OKC to get to the playoffs? No, I'm just kidding.
OKC is going to be mad if they make the playoffs. So Sam Presti's going to be annoyed if the Thunder win enough to make the playoffs.
That's right. That's right. No, this was just a joke question. No chance for them. I don't know. Maybe Minnesota. Do you see anything bright around Minnesota?
Karl Anthony Towns is a borderline top 10 player, and he just doesn't receive enough credit. Anthony Edwards really came alive last year. Malik Beasley is good. Jaden McDaniels is good. D'Angelo Russell, I think people are probably too hard on him. He's someone who can hit off the dribble jumpers and just run pick and rolls until the end of time. There's value in that. So there's a real base there. I wouldn't put it past them to do something wild, like trade for Pascal Siakam if he becomes available and pair Towns with Siakam in the front court. So I do see a path to them making the playoffs, and maybe it's a little bit more open than we're expecting because you have the Nuggets injury with Murray, the Kawhi injury with the Clippers, and then the Warriors, if they don't trade for a star, they're still sort of combustible. Getting Clay back, what does he look like? He hasn't played basketball in 2 years. He's coming back from 2 serious injuries. Draymond has regressed on offense, and now if you didn't trade for a star, you're either playing a really raw rookie in Kuminga and also relying on Moses Moody. You're not guaranteed to be a playoff team. So of the that you mentioned, I think clearly Minnesota is most likely to make the playoffs. I might even argue at this point, I probably have more faith in them to do so than I would Sacramento if you gave me the option of choosing between the two.
Okay, that's not a really high bar, but still, it's a bar. It's a bar. Okay, let's now move to my Denver Nuggets. They are preparing for a strange season after having 5 consecutive seasons of improved success. Jamal Murray's injury prevented them from competing with the Suns. Now they might get as many new players like the last time they had to replace 7 players from the season before. They've drafted Bones Highland. Did you have a chance to scout him a bit? How do you feel about Bones, and do you think there is a path for him to maybe play significant minutes this season with Jamal Murray out? Because he's kind of a similar player. I mean, he can pull out from anywhere, and he even have a bit of a passing game to him as well. But here in Nuggets land, we feel he might not get any minutes because our coach is Michael Malone and he doesn't play rookies at all. So I would like to hear your perspective on this, because we might be looking at it too personally when we speak about Coach Malone and his ways of coaching.
Well, one, I thought Bones Highland was one of my favorite players of this draft class, and there are problems with his game. Defensively, he's bad. He will die on screens, and he needs to get in better stances. But he's also long for his size, and so that might give him a fighting chance if he's ever able to get his stances down. His offense it's wow. He needs to be a better playmaker. And that, along with Michael Malone, might be what keeps him off the floor aside from his defense. I think probably the best way to endear yourself to Michael Malone if you're a rookie is play your ass off on defense. And so if you see that, maybe he'd be more inclined to play Bones. But when you look at what he does on offense, he is like this contortionist around the rim. He has these really absurd finishes. And you already mentioned he can score from anywhere. And it's not just throw him the ball, catch and shoot deep threes. He will take a step back from just so far out. The motion it's fluid but slow at the moment. I'm curious to see how it will fare against NBA defenses and length, but I think, is ready to contribute on the offensive end immediately for any team. I don't have a great feel. You would have the better feel for whether he will get a chance in Denver. I think it's more likely he gets a chance this season than most normal seasons because of the Murray injury, but they do have Facundo Campazzo. They do have Monte Morris. Maybe they bring back Austin Rivers, and then Jokic is the engine of your offense anyway. And so I would be shocked if he plays a major role. I really would like to see them be more experimental with him, though. And I think, again, just knowing Michael Malone and some of the issues he's had with Michael Porter Jr. and even Jokic earlier on, the best way to maybe endear yourself to him is I'm going to work my behind off on defense, and perhaps that's the pathway to getting minutes as a rookie. And this is, it's apples and oranges really because of how old he was, but that's a big part of why Facundo Campazzo was on the floor for the Nuggets is, it was just passing, but he gets into guys and he really works his butt off on defense too. So maybe if Highland shows a commitment to improving there, he can get time. And I hope he does, because he is such a fun player and his ceiling it's higher to me than a lot of the guys that were taken in front of him.
Well, and especially if you look at the other guards that Denver now has, because we have no idea if Will Barton will be returning. We think he will, and you predicted that as well 3 days ago. So I will be having you personally responsible if he doesn't. So what you gonna do? But if you take out Will Barton and you have Jamal Murray, who is injured, you actually have no starting level guards at all on the team, because Facundo Campazzo, as great he is a really good backup guard. The same goes for Monte Morris. And then you have PJ Dozier, who is neither here or there. We actually don't know what he is, because he didn't have a chance to play big minutes continuously for months and months, as he might this season. So we don't know about that. But what you said about them experimenting with Bones Highland, I actually think this is a really good season for that, because right now they hope they have found their big three with Jamal, Jokic, and Michael Porter, but they will have 0 playoff runs as a sample to check if it makes sense to offer a max deal to Michael Porter right now and fill out the roster mostly with minimum contract guys around them starting from season 2022-2023. So should they look at this season as a buffer season between serious runs and restructure their salary table somehow, maybe even trading somebody as good as Michael Porter? or should they go all in searching for an upgrade now and attack high seed, hoping that Jamal Murray will be awesome come April?
I would go with the latter. I just think, Michael, I don't know who you're going to get. It's so tough to build trades for Michael Porter Jr. He's really good. So you don't necessarily want to lose him, but he's so cheap that you then have to attach money to him to get a player back. And it's at this point, who are you acquiring that is going to make your roster a lot better than the version of Michael Porter Jr. that you basically have? He had some struggles in the playoffs, and I think his back injuries those are a little harrowing, but he is just the perfect offensive complement if he's willing to stay in this role long-term with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. I think there is merit to what you said about maybe restructuring a little bit, because Aaron Gordon's going to be a free agent in 2022 as well. And now you're not going to have, also Murray should come back, but you've yet to have like a long sample with all four of those guys together. So you don't really have a great feel for what your ceiling is. And where Michael Porter Jr., you have to pay him the max, because if you don't, other teams will, if you let him get to restricted free agency, which they might not. They might extend him because it's that much of a no-brainer. But Aaron Gordon's going to cost real money to return too. And if you've paid Will Barton this summer, which I think you can argue that they almost need to keep Will Barton because of all the stuff we were mentioning about their guards, they get expensive really quickly. I think that's probably something they confront next year, because you have a top 5 player in Jokic right now, the reigning MVP. There is no gap year here. It just, you can't, I don't think you can justify it, because I think he makes you so good on his own. Like they were a viable, really good playoff team without Jamal Murray. And I think at this point, you expect to get Jamal Murray back at some point in the season. So maybe you don't go all in, but I think you at least stay the course here. If they really wanted to go all in, like you get nuclear and you start dangling, Monte Morris, PJ Dozier, and Highland. And like, what does that get you on the trade market? Like, is Boston, if Marcus Smart doesn't want to sign an extension with them, or they don't want to pay him because he's about to cost a ton of money in 2022, that's someone who'd be a perfect fit for the Nuggets, in my opinion. And you can cobble together a good enough package for him to at least get in the discussion if Boston makes him available. But that's just a name that I'm throwing out there. Like, you could go that route still. I still would be hesitant to do that, just because you don't know what this team is with Jamal Murray just yet. And also, Aaron Gordon needs to show you more on offense for sure than he did in the playoffs. My recommendation, or my preference for them, would be to mostly stay the course. Resign Will Barton if you can. And if you don't, then you really need to be committed to experimenting with Bones Highland. I wouldn't be opposed to them, though. If you had to go one way or the other, where it's sort of looking at not selling, but like you said, restructuring their roster, or going all in again, like they've kind of done now. Like the Aaron Gordon trade was like their double down play. Like, we believe in this core. We think we could be title favorites. I would argue they should lean towards doing that again, even without knowing when and when Jamal Murray comes back and what he looks like once he does, more so than kind of viewing this as an in-between gap year.
I'm going to put you on the spot right now and ask you, because you're my favorite fake trade maker out of them all. So tell me, if Denver would trade Michael Porter for Tyrese Haliburton right now, how would that trade look like? Who would need to add picks, protection, something like that? Because hear me out, Tyrese Haliburton has 3 more years on his rookie scale deal, and he's really, really good. He's not as good as Michael Porter, and he probably will never be as good as Michael Porter. But he's a really solid defender, really good shooter. He was almost 50-40-90 last season in his rookie season, which is insane. So how would you make this fake trade? And would the Kings accept it anyway?
If it was straight up and on the Kings, I accept it. Unless you just have intel on his back, knowing it's never going to be the same. I know he's about to be expensive, but him and De'Aaron Fox are going to wreck worlds on the offensive end together. And I would think it would be Sacramento that has to include a little bit more. It's fairly even, because you mentioned the cost control nature of Haliburton's contract, and he's just his skill set is so comprehensive. I think what you have going for you, if you're the Nuggets, is that Michael Porter Jr. is an all-star caliber scorer, and Haliburton's never going to get to that point. That's not supposed to be his game. So I think the Kings need to give you other stuff. That's a really interesting thought exercise, though. Someone proposed to me, would you give up Michael Porter Jr. for OG Anunoby? And that was another one that made me think. This one is making me think even more, but I believe it would be Sacramento, even with Michael Porter Jr.'s impending payday. That has to be the party that's giving you more.
Excellent. I really enjoyed that one. I actually came up with it a week ago. I had Adam Mares on the same place where you are now, and he actually liked that trade as well. Even though he's a big Michael Porter guy, it's just when you look at the structure of salaries Denver has now in this gap season, that might really make sense for them. Even though the fans would hate it at the first point for sure. Okay, and for the end, give us your insanely way too early prediction of which 8 teams will compete in next season's playoffs in the West.
All right, so I need to bring up the NBA standings here just so I don't leave everybody out. So the locks are definitely the Lakers. I'm going to say the Suns are a lock because I think Chris Paul is back. I'm going to say Utah's a lock because I think Mike Conley's back. I'm going to go ahead and say Denver's a lock because you have Nikola Jokic. That's 4 locks. Dallas is a lock. That's 5. Is Golden State a lock? I don't know. Oh, man. Utah, Phoenix, Denver, Dallas, the Lakers, the Warriors. I don't feel good about that. The Blazers, and I'm going to say the Clippers. I don't know that the Pelicans are going to have enough juice to get over the hump there. So that's not really a lot of variance when you look at the playoff teams from this year. It's the Jazz, Suns, Nuggets, Clippers, Mavericks, and Blazers. I think they all get back there. The Lakers will get back. The only team I'm really changing is Golden State for Memphis. That's pretty boring. But maybe New Orleans gets in there because I don't know that. I think you would need the Clippers to fall out. I'm trying to look at these teams, and unless Chris Paul leaves Utah or the Blazers blow it up, I think the Clippers are the team that would be most likely to fall out of the original 7 from last season.
Oh boy, yeah, I agree. It's not very exciting to say it like that, but what you're gonna do? Maybe if we meet up again in a week after this crazy free agency starts, maybe we will have some better things to gauge on. But at this point, not enough things have changed for us to make different predictions. Thank you, Dan, for your time. I took a bit more than an hour of your time, so sorry about that. Everybody, just remember to follow Dan at Dan Favale. So it's at DANFAVALE or Dan Favale in Serbian. Follow him on Bleacher Report. Most definitely follow Hardware Knocks. It's an awesome podcast, general NBA podcast. And let's meet again in a season to see what we got right this time.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.
Nugget Srbija, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, zvonce, stisnite, like, share, komentar, MySpace, na blogu, u novinama smo sutra, gledajte nas. To je to.